Good afternoon. If I could ask everyone to please take your seats, we will go ahead and get started.
I don't want 1 minute early.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Hilltop. I am Dr. Andrew Prahl, Provost and Chief Academic Officer at St. Edward's University. Earlier this year, I became one of the 1,000 people per day who moves to Texas. As I transitioned to Austin from Indiana, I quickly discovered the Texas Tribune. The fact-based, well-researched, and provocative articles and conversations produced by the Tribune quickly immersed me in all things Texas. I am very much looking forward to today's conversation on Austin and the legislature as I continue to learn more about my new home state. Before we begin, there are a few things I would like to share with you about St. Edward's. Our graduates continue on to great success. 91% of our students are employed, volunteering, or in graduate school within 6 to 12 months after graduation. We are a top national producer of Fulbright Scholars, with over 60 students selected to the U.S. government's flagship International Educational Exchange Program since 2008. We are a vibrant and diverse community. 41% of our student body is Hispanic, and a total of 52% represent minority populations. We provide the nation's longest and continuously running college assistant migrant program. The quality of our academics continues to grow. We are ranked in the top 15 schools in the West by U.S. News and World Report. We continue to grow as Austin's top private university. Over the past 20 years, we have doubled the enrollment of our freshman class, built over a dozen modern facilities, and have raised over $180 million. All of these accolades are rooted in our Catholic Holy Cross mission that inspires us to form the hearts and minds of our students. I'll also note that we are a proud member institution of the Independent Colleges and Universities of Texas, ICUT, a nonprofit advocacy organization for Texas private colleges and universities and our students. Now that you know a little bit more about St. Edward's, I would like to introduce some very special people we have in the room today, our students of the university. These students are bright, inquisitive minds, and their justice-seeking hearts will shape Texas and the nation in the future. For our guests in the room, please take time to meet our students. I am confident they will quickly show you their intelligence, maturity, and strong work ethic. And students, the people that you will find in this room likely come from diverse industries in Texas. Please be sure to introduce yourself to as many people as you can today. You never know where a new connection and a new friend could lead. I know that you will learn much from our three speakers today, as they have great wisdom and experience in leading and shaping our state. As our state and local region prepare for the 86th legislative session, I would like to draw on a part of the St. Edward's University mission statement, which directs the university to teach our students critical and creative thinking, as well as moral reasoning, to analyze problems, propose solutions, and make responsible decisions. These are lifelong pursuits, and it is our hope that all involved in shaping the policies of Texas employ these faculties for the greater good of all Texans. A special thank you to Evan Smith, CEO of the Tribune, for leading the conversation today. And thank you to our Central Texas elected officials, Senator Donna Campbell and Senator Kirk Watson, for providing their perspectives and leadership on key issues. Finally, we'd like to thank our audience, both present here and streaming online. And again, welcome to all to St. Edward's University.
Provost, thank you. Give him a big hand. We appreciate you being such a great host. Provost, thank you. I am Evan Smith, the CEO and co-founder of the Texas Tribune. What the Provost did not mention is that St. Edward's University is the alma mater of the next Speaker of the Texas House, Dennis Bonnen. You all are fixing to have the best legislative session ever here at St. Edward's. I think you want to ask for a whole bunch of stuff in the next session. I want to welcome you to our event today, a conversation with Senator Donna Campbell and Senator Kirk Watson. I'll introduce our guests in a second. This is the third in a series of conversations we've done over the course of the year with members of the delegation representing Austin and Travis County, on the topic of how this area impacts and is impacted by the legislature. We did an event earlier this year at Austin Community College with Representatives Donna Howard, Eddie Rodriguez, and Gina Hinojosa. We did an event at Concordia University with Representative Paul Workman and Representative Celia Israel, and this is the third of our three, and we're very fortunate to have had the presence and the participation of these elected officials. The Tribune, you know, does events all over the state of Texas, more than 60 a year, with elected officials on a stage in front of an audience such as yourselves. We talk about the issues that affect all of you, the priorities for our state and our communities, and we're pleased to have the opportunity, more than 9 years in business, to do this as part of the mix of what the Tribune produces. So to Dr. Prohl, to St. Edward's University, particularly Liz Johnson, Gabriel Ornelas, and everybody here on the campus, we thank you very much for your generosity in hosting us. These events are free to attend. They're not free to put on. And I want to acknowledge the sponsors who make it possible for us to do our event here today and the events that we do, generally speaking, around the state. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Texas is a great Texas Tribune partner, sponsor of our events. Pearson and the independent colleges and universities of Texas. Please give them a big hand. They have made it possible for us to be here today. And of course, I want to thank any of you who support the Texas Tribune by being a member of our public media organization. Those member dollars make it possible for us to do the work we do for all of Texas. If you're a member, thank you very much for becoming a member whenever you did once upon a time. And if you're not a member, we're certainly happy to have you become a member of the Tribune today or at some point this year. Support.texastribune.org or texastribune.org/give to become a member of the Tribune. I want to just point out that next Friday we will be on the campus, Thursday the 29th, next Thursday, 11/29. We'll be on the campus of the University of Texas at Austin for another free Texas Tribune event, a day-long preview of the 86th legislative session, and I want to encourage any of you who are interested in the topic today, that will be a full day to dive into the big issues and the politics of the next session. I want to encourage you to be there. If you have a phone out, please silence it for the benefit of the people in the room, as well as the live stream today. We have a lot of people watching at home. If you're going to tweet about today's event, let me encourage you to use the hashtag TT events. We'll do about 40 minutes of conversation from the stage. We'll take your questions in the last 10 to 15, and we'll have you out of here on time at 1 o'clock. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce the two legislators who've joined us kindly today. Donna Campbell, Republican of New Braunfels, was first chosen to represent Senate District 25 in 2012. She won her third term on Election Day, beating her Democratic opponent by more than 15 points, by the standards of the 2018 cycle, a Republican landslide. In the 85th session, she chairs the Veterans Affairs and Border Security Committee, sits on the Education, Business and Commerce, and Intergovernmental Relations and Administration Committees. Born in California, Dr. Campbell has an undergraduate degree from Central State University in Oklahoma, a master's degree from Texas Women's University, and a medical degree from Texas Tech University. Kirk Watson, Democrat of Austin, first elected to represent Senate District 14 in 2006. He has been reelected 4 times since, most recently on Election Day, when he defeated 2 opponents with nearly 72% of the vote. In the 85th session, he sits on the Finance, Health and Human Services, Higher Education, and Nomination Committees. And he's a member of the Sunset Advisory Commission. He previously served 2 terms as mayor of Austin. He was born in Oklahoma City, raised in Fort Worth. He has an undergraduate degree and a law degree from Baylor University. Please join me in welcoming Senators Donna Campbell and Kirk Watson. So thanks to the two of you for being here. I do want to talk about the session, but of course the session follows an election season that was interesting for a change in Texas. We're used to boring elections, non-competitive elections here in the state of Texas, and this year was an outlier in that respect. I am sitting on stage with the 2 Texas senators. Of the 15 races on the ballot, these 2 received the most votes of any candidates for the Texas Senate in the last election cycle. Senator Watson first, Senator Campbell second. Senator Campbell's race, the total number of votes cast in that race topped 400,000, more than in any other race on the ballot. Senator Campbell, this was quite a year for turnout and quite a year for elections. What do you attribute that to?
Well, we did see a lot of momentum. It was a very energized season.
Yep.
I think we can all agree on that. You know, looking at, I think President Trump drives momentum to the polls, a lot for him, others against him. So there was that drive to get folks to
Yep.
the polls. And then there was, the big U.S. Senate race. That again drove folks to the polls.
Right.
And it was a little surprising for me, and to see some of the tight Republican races. I didn't anticipate that.
We're not used to
thankful.
close races in Texas, that's right.
Well, that close, you're right.
Yeah.
And so I'm very thankful for my win, but I think looking at why was it as tight as it was, when we know Texas has economically we're doing great. Republican leadership, we've got a strong economic model.
Right.
And I have to wonder if that message just really wasn't out there enough, because you would expect when we've got great jobs, families are doing well, for them to vote with their pocketbook.
Right.
And I'm not sure that we saw that, because we do know, Republican leadership equals an economic, prosperous model for Texas. So I don't feel that we messaged that
Sufficiently.
well enough.
Right.
And hence we've got, because of the momentum and because of inadequate messaging, I think we just had a much closer race.
Senator Watson, my colleague Ross Ramsey has said for many years, anger is a greater motivator than joy at election time. Senator Campbell called out the fact that the president was a factor in this turnout, good and bad. President's not on the ballot typically in a midterm election. In this midterm election, President Trump was absolutely on the ballot, wouldn't you say?
He begged people to put him.
He wanted this to be about him, and in the end it was about him, wasn't it?
Well, a big part of it was, and I also think, am I on?
No?
She does that to me on the floor.
Right.
Can you hear me?
They need
Is
to
your
turn
is your
it on.
mic on?
No, it's on, yeah.
You want to borrow mine?
Let's get one of the handhelds, please.
Try it again.
They do this to there
There
we
you go.
You're
Okay,
on.
good.
I was going to say
Just
they
in
do
case.
this. They do this to Democrats all the time.
Oh, yeah. And we still hear them.
Right, exactly.
so-
What does it take to hear a man's voice in politics, Senator Watson? Right?
So, couple of things. One is Trump begged to be a part of this election, and I think he got his wish. Of course, I agree with Senator Campbell that the U.S. Senate race, that race also helped drive. But I'm going to disagree with her a little bit on whether this was just a problem in Republican messaging. I think it actually was a sign that we're seeing a change. And part of that change is being driven by the fact that while we do have quite a bit of prosperity, we also have some problems that aren't being addressed. I don't think it's just enough to message that we have a strong economy and now we're done. I think that people are, teachers. I think teachers were a big part of the momentum and a big part of the discussion and debate and the turnout. Because what happens is session after session, they get told, we're going to take care of you, we love you, we mean it, and then don't do anything about it. I think people that are stuck in traffic and congestion and saying, what are we doing about infrastructure?
Yep.
I think that drove some of it. I think we are sitting in an institution of higher education, and what we're doing in terms of what we're not doing in terms of making it easier for people to go to college.
Yeah.
And then, I could go on, but one of the other things is what's happening with regard to our public school system and the need to really do something about school finance and address property tax reform in a meaningful way in the context of school finance. I don't think it was a problem of Republicans doing a poor job of messaging. I think it was that we aren't addressing those issues in a meaningful way, and that drives momentum, that drives voter turnout.
Senator Campbell, every election is a referendum on those in charge. If you want to rehire the people, you rehire them. If you're not happy with the performance, you hire somebody else. The fact that the races were closer than normal, now your race was 15 points, you're good. But Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, after winning by 19 points when he was first elected in 2014, won by 5 points. The Attorney General won by fewer than 4 points. The Ag Commissioner won by 5 points. Greg Abbott was reelected by fewer than 14 points. Is there a lens through which you regard those results and say, this was the state saying we're not entirely happy with the leadership that we have right now and we want to send a message? Can you see a possible theory of that case?
Well, I can see where there is frustration. Can we do better?
Yeah.
But the answer is, can we do better with what we've got?
Right.
We're not talking about going out and raising taxes to get more revenue streams, trying to get any programs cut or even a decrease in the dollars that they may have had from a session or two before. Makes it very difficult. So truly, the things that Senator Watson was talking about are issues that we are all concerned about. I mean, those are real issues that we need to address.
Right.
So yes, I think those issues are important to all of us. And as you were talking about, you know, I think sometimes people do vote out of frustration or fear or anger.
Right.
And so, you know, we've got just a good product so far as trying to keep regulations down on not only businesses but the citizens, and trying to rein in, you know, too much growth in government. But can we do more? We need to try. We need to have a strategy that we can bring it in still under a fiscal budget.
And so the message of this election, Senator Campbell, is that you all need to look at what you're doing and try to align better with the desires of voters. Maybe you need to reconnect with voters on some of these issues and do better at addressing some of these problems.
Right, and I mean, I couldn't agree more. We've got to do something about school finance. I mean, Senator Watson and I were on the same page there. We do want to do more for our teachers, but we want those dollars to go into the classroom to follow the child and our teachers. So yes, we need to do that. I don't know that we disagree on anything. It's how we get to that. And we put dollars in infrastructure. I mean, we both voted for the dollars to go to infrastructure, find more dollars in both Prop 1 previously and then Prop 7 previously, to try to get more dollars for highway. But as we sit in traffic and, you know, the backhoes and excavators on each side of us making traffic even worse, we're still getting toward that goal. It just can't, you know, government lags the innovation that we need to get everything done.
Senator Watson, I hear Senator Campbell talk about education and transportation, you the same. These are meat and potatoes issues for Texas. One of the byproducts of this election, where you now have a closer margin between Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, 1912, and between Republicans and Democrats in the House, 83-67, down from 95-55, is people are saying we're going to see government closer to the center, that there's going to be a need to bring people together to agree on issues and to focus on those meat and potatoes issues. You think that'll be one byproduct of these elections?
It's certainly something I hope for. What I hope for is that we don't, that we prioritize things. I think the voters said, we want you prioritizing things differently. For example, instead of a special session that was primarily focused on a bathroom bill, we want you to focus on schools. We want you to focus on how we get real property tax relief in the concept, in the context of school finance. We want you to focus on, are there more ways that we can spend, more ways that we can do things with regard to infrastructure and higher ed. I think a message that if people don't believe it, I think you'll see it come back in 2020 and beyond. And that is that the public is asking for us to do a better job of prioritizing.
Right. And Senator Campbell, and working together again.
Absolutely.
In a Senate with 19 Republicans and 12 Democrats, where you need 19 votes to bring a bill to the floor, you all don't have any margin of error, right? I mean, one theory of this session, not to get too down in the weeds, is that the most powerful man in Texas is Kel Seliger, the senator from Amarillo, who is viewed as the least conservative or the most moderate among the Republican caucus. He can single-handedly stop anything that he does not want to see make it to the floor of the Senate. You only have 19. So in some ways, the Republicans and the Democrats are going to need to find common purpose, work together as much as possible. Otherwise, no business of the Senate can be done. Would you generally agree with that?
Right, but I would also say, and I think Senator Watson can agree, we're a cordial body in the Senate, and we have, you know, deliberative thinking, and majority, over 80% or so of our legislation passed is bipartisan.
Right.
So we've worked together before. I agree, you know, looking at some better prioritization of legislation. but we really try to work, I think we
Right.
work well together. Strategies may change a little bit,
Yeah.
but values aren't going to change. And I truly believe every senator
Yeah.
in the Senate wants the best for Texas.
Right.
It's just how we arrive at that.
So do you think, Senator, in a Senate that is closer, in a legislature that is closer, one theory is that a lot of the sharp objects in the previous session that were on the table will be off the table this time. For instance, if you could not get bathroom legislation passed in a Senate that was 2011, and in a House that was 95-55, it is going to be next to impossible to get that done in this session with the results of the election. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but let me just back up as you're calling it bathroom bill, and I think that's just what was
Well, that's the
messaged out
shorthand,
there.
lowercase
Right.
b, right?
But
That's the shorthand.
what that was really about is privacy. It was about privacy. And it was about businesses being able to set their own
Sure.
policies.
I know that there's a
So-
disagreement about the substance.
Right.
You know, different people
Right.
characterize or categorize. I get that, but however we call this, a privacy bill, a bathroom bill, whatever it was, in this Senate, in this House, in this legislature, one consequence of the elections is such legislation, whatever you call it, however you characterize it, is likely not to resurface.
I don't know. I don't know if that anyone's got that bill that they're already
Yeah.
working on. I mean, I really don't.
What
So-
about vouchers, Senator? Do you think that vouchers has a chance in a session like this if it was not able to pass in a legislature with the math last time? Is it likely to come back in the legislature with the math this time?
So let me change the word vouchers. Of course, a rose known by any other name is still a rose. But let me change vouchers to school choice. I will always have hope that we can do the right thing. You know, school choice is out there. You're rich enough, you're mobile enough, your kids get choice school. Who is school choice for? It helps the poorest of the poor.
Right. So you think
And
that
so
issue,
they're the ones.
Yeah, so
I
that
do-
issue comes back in this session?
Well, I'm not sure. But I can tell you, when we're talking about compassion,
Yeah.
you know, the rich kids get school choice. The poorest of the poor don't. Now, if the school that they are in fits for them best, great.
Right.
But for instance, we've got 120,000 or more on a list for charter schools. So what are they doing that parents want to send their children there? So it's not about the word vouchers. It's about a choice where parents can choose the arena in which to educate their children. And it can be a win-win situation. The dollars that go, it's only partial dollars that can follow the child. The rest of the dollars, let them stay in the school system. Let them follow the teachers. Let's build up for teacher pay. Let's find a way to do that. Let schools opt in for a school choice if they want their children.
Senator, I know that you and Senator Campbell don't agree, Senator Watson, that you and Senator Campbell don't necessarily see the details of either of these two bits of legislation in the same way.
That would be a very fair way of saying that.
Describing it. But however it's described, whatever the focus of the substance of this legislation, the reality is the math of this legislature makes it more complicated
I think
rather
it-
than less complicated
I
for
think-
this stuff to come out.
I agree with that. I think it's far more difficult, particularly when you start counting those rural members that vouchers don't benefit and actually probably do damage. I would say that, so the math, I think the math makes it harder. I actually think that all you got to do is look at what happened last session to also know a little bit about that. The House kept saying, if you do vouchers, it's going to kill the ability to address school finance. The Senate kept saying, we're going to try to kill the ability to do school finance. And that's what the Senate, I started to say we, but I would not include myself in that category. But that's what the Senate did.
Yeah.
I think now with the change in numbers, it makes it even more difficult. I keep hearing and truly believe that people listened during this election cycle. And one of the things they heard is that people want the legislature to prioritize things and address things like public education. And I think as part of that, particularly if a member of the legislature says, we can't have any additional money put in it. First of all, I don't think that works. I think we're going to have to find ways to put additional revenue. But and then we talk in terms of compassion.
Right.
I think where we ought to fund the compassion on public education is in things like making sure we're doing right with early childhood education in our traditional public schools, so that what we'll be able to do is have these kids, particularly those who are economically disadvantaged and those who live in pockets of poverty, be able to succeed. And I actually think that people are saying some of the right things in that regard. If you look at the Public School Finance Commission's outcomes report, even if you look at the governor's proposal, where there's overlap between the two, we're starting to see movement in that direction.
Right.
I think that's going to by itself preclude the discussion on things like taking money out of that and putting it into to things like vouchers.
So you will be an advocate for funding pre-K this session?
Yes, without question.
Fully and full day?
Yes, and let me just say that in the past, Senator Campbell and I have worked, she carried a bill, she was the author of a bill in the Senate that I think she'll agree, I worked very closely with her to try to get that out of the Senate. In my view, it was a step in the right direction, but I think that we're at a point where we ought to lock the doors, keep us in there, and get this done, and a big part of that must be early childhood.
Senator, do you have common purpose with Senator Watson on early childhood?
Yeah, I did carry the bill for quality pre-K.
Right.
And, it costs a lot of money, but we do know that early education does help, especially by third grade. We need the reading. We've got to make sure they're caught up. We've got to make sure we've got good math and reading skills at third grade.
Yeah. Are you for full day or just half day?
I need to look at that.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm still half day.
Right.
But I need to know, what do parents want? What do we have the money to
But
bring
you're
in?
open to a conversation on the
I'm open to
basic
it.
research. All right, Senator Watson talked about putting more money into public education generally, Senator Campbell. Are you for more money spent on public ed in this session?
It depends on what we're going to do with it. I mean, a blanket statement of just putting more money into something without having some performance basis to it or accountability to it, where do we stop? Do we just continue to put money into it without some measurable gains? We've put money into education, more money every session, the 3 sessions I've been here. We need to see a corresponding increase in academic performance. Decrease the gap that a child has when they come in versus when they get out in each grade. So how do you measure that? I mean, these are things we need to look at. So a blanket, let's put more money in, no. Am I willing to have a conversation about how we can put money in to fund good performance? Dollars following the child, more dollars for teacher, yes.
Senator,
conversation, but not just a blanket.
There's been a big conversation about the degree to which the state has reduced its share of public education funding. That the state funded out of the state budget X% in the old days, it funds significantly less than that now, and that correspondingly, property taxpayers have had to bear more of the cost of funding public education. And as much as people, would you agree with the premise? Do you agree with the premise that the shift has occurred, that the state is funding less and property taxpayers are paying more?
Well, I know that school districts continue to raise their taxes.
Right.
And we come in and make them whole where there's a deficit there. All funds, we're paying about 52% of our budget goes to education.
Right.
All funds.
Right.
And trying to find more dollars just to pay for that is difficult without cutting something else. CASA, community and schools. I mean, you can just name the things we fund. So trying to find dollars to add more without, again, performance base is going to be difficult.
Right.
But I think even if we found miraculously found more dollars for the state to put into education, I'm not convinced that the districts would turn around and reverse their tax rate. I'm not convinced that they would do that.
Yeah. Senator Watson, you believe that the state has, that the state has decreased its share of funding of public education.
It's pretty easy to look at. The way it works, the way the formula works, is that if property values go up, and so that property tax revenue goes up, the state's share of general revenue funding goes down. I mean, it's that simple. Now, lots of members act like, well, there's nothing we can do about that. That's the formula, except that we wrote the formula so we could redo that. So if you actually look at the numbers during the
Just talk down to it.
is that it? Yep.
Yes.
So during the biennium that we're currently in, the legislative appropriation request and the budget that was passed, it counted on roughly a 7% increase in local property values, so that additional money would come in and there would be a corresponding decrease in the revenue needed from the state to put in. If you look at the legislative appropriation request of TEA for the upcoming biennium, the one that we will consider when we come back in January, it's looking at a roughly 6.77% increase per year. What that would do is it would drive down the state share of funding of the state's public education system down into the low 30%. Around 33% is what some people say. By 2021, that could go below 30% if we don't do something about it. Now, there's a lot of things to take into account on that. If you look at what the legislature did in a couple of sessions ago, it started looking at how we could do away with the margins tax and reduce the margins tax. In fact, the margins tax was reduced by 25%, creating an over $2 billion structural deficit. And what people forget is that the margins tax was revised or reformed, or whatever is the politically correct term, in the 2006 session, in large part to provide property tax relief.
Yeah.
And here we are, I joke that what happens is at the beginning of every session, they bring us all down into the well of our chamber, and like the movie Men in Black, they hold up the little deal and they go, boop, and everybody forgets what we did the last time. Yeah, we just wipe out everybody's memory, and then it's all a fresh slate. The problem with that is we're forgetting mistakes or we're forgetting decisions that might have been made that would give us some property tax relief. So there's no question that now is the time to address this. We have to provide folks property tax relief. In Austin, over half the tax bill is going to be going to recapture as well. So something has to be done, and it's now time for us to get it done.
Well, Senator, there was a big debate at the end of the last session about some modification of how property tax rates go up at the local level. There was a discussion of whether voters should be brought into the conversation beyond a certain threshold. I think the House threshold was 6%, the Senate threshold was 4%. The idea was that if local officials wanted to raise property taxes above that threshold, they would have to go to the voters and get the voters to sign off on it. The governor came back during his campaign and actually lowered that threshold to, I think, 2 or 2.5%. And apparently that conversation is going to spike back up. At a threshold to be determined, people would have to go to their voters and say, is it okay to raise property taxes? Where are you going to come down on that?
Well, I'm opposed, and for a couple of reasons.
You're opposed to any mechanism where voters would be brought into the conversation?
No. In fact, as you know, let me get to the point of that, because I want to tell you the basis for a decision. First of all, you got to break it out. You got to break it out into two parts. The first part is the 2.5% that has been laid out as a proposal, as it applies across the board. So it applies not only to city government, county government, but it also applies to school districts.
Right.
Here's a very interesting problem with that. If you're going to compress that down to 2.5%, when I just told you that TEA is counting on a 6.77% per year property value increase, if you cap that at 2.5%, you have to ask the question, where will that delta come from? 2.5 to 6.77 is about $3.8 billion.
So that's potentially a reduction in funding of public education.
Well, either you're going to have to come up with new revenue, or you're going to have to cut by $3.8 billion. So based upon that math, unless you can come up with additional revenue
Right.
that makes sense, I mean, I'm not sure how you could be supportive of a cut of almost $4 billion from public education. As it applies to other jurisdictions, I've always felt like that has been, I'm hoping we're going to have an honest conversation about that. I've always felt like the attack on jurisdictions like cities and counties has been because the legislature hadn't figured out a way to get itself out of the box it created on public schools, and so it sets a fire over there in hopes that everybody's distracted by that fire while it continues to stoke this fire on public
Right.
on funding its own public school system.
But but Senator Watson, before I go to Senator Campbell, the simplification of this is all the legislature is saying is take it to the voters. What problem do you have with the will of the voters? If the voters are comfortable with you all raising, if you can make your case well enough to raise property taxes, the voters will be with you.
So here's the way I generally would say you deal with the will of the voters. You respect those people the voters put into office
Right.
to make those decisions at the local level. Now, I was elected, just reelected. Senator Campbell was just reelected, and those were very important elections. Anytime I'm elected, it's an important election.
Stipulated, right? Yeah.
But,
wow.
but here's the thing. It was no more important than the city council elections and the county commissioners
Right.
elections that we also had on that same
Yeah.
day. And we need to give them, instead of the state, it's such a deflection. And it really takes some guts to criticize the local elected officials in their decision making
Right.
when you've got a state that is doing what it's doing to teachers, when it's doing what it's doing to vulnerable children, the mistakes that are being made at the state level, and then act like, oh, we're just smarter
Right.
and better than what
Yeah.
those local elected officials are.
Let me flip this around, Senator Campbell. Isn't it true that we have a check on tax-raising communist city council members, and that check is called elections?
Mm-hmm.
You all don't need to put some kind of a check in where they have to go to the voters. If the city council members in Austin raise our property taxes, or the county commissioners raise their property taxes, next time they're on the ballot, conservative citizens of those communities will vote the bums out. Isn't that a sufficient check?
Well, I think that local control is fine until it's loco control. Or out of control. Whenever you're looking at some point, look where our property taxes have ended up. And every year, everybody in this room that owns property writes an increased property tax.
Nobody likes property
taxes.
taxes,
And that's
right.
just an example. And I think just putting a check on how much you can reach outside the box, how much you can affect change within your community. At some point, you need to look back. How are we going to protect taxpayers in general? You're right. If there's enough that believe property taxes need to go down, either party, yes, those folks would be elected or not re-elected.
Right.
But for everybody looking at taxpayers,
Yeah.
I think that we do need to hold the line at the rate of increase of our property tax.
Now, Senator Campbell, you remember that in the last session when this legislation was before the House and the Senate, whether it was 6 or 4%, property tax legislation.
Right.
You had local elected officials, most of whom run as nonpartisan office holders, but you had local elected officials from Democratic or liberal areas and from Republican or conservative areas come to the Capitol and say, you are constraining our ability as local elected officials to provide the services that our constituents expect. You're coming in and saying to us, you're limited in how much revenue you can raise just to do the basic things that happen in communities. Were you sympathetic to those local you had them from your district, surely, as
I did.
Everybody did.
Right.
What do you say back to those local elected officials who say you're tying our hands and making it impossible for us to serve our constituents?
We are not stopping them from doing what they want to do. They just have to make their case to the people
voters.
and let the people vote.
Yeah.
It does not stop if they want to raise taxes.
Right.
If they want to increase the rate of the delta there,
Right.
they can make
Yeah.
the case.
Yeah.
If it's a good case, taxpayers are smart. If they want it, they're going to vote yes on raising the taxes. All that was about was bringing it to the people to vote.
Right. Senator.
two things, and one is it is clearly a deflection to say that's all it is. With all due respect, it's a deflection away from. You want to talk about loco? I'll tell you what's loco. What's loco is that over half the property tax bill in Austin Independent School District is going to the state of Texas to fund the state's school system. And until, look, you can't be a member of the legislature and say, I want to do something about property taxes, and then not be willing to do something about our school finance system, which is the number one cause of problems in property tax, and not with almost no accountability for the members of the legislature. You talk about wanting accountability and to take it to the voters because that's accountable. There's almost no accountability. You don't get to be the victim and the perpetrator of this problem. And that's what they're trying to do. So we've got to fix the property tax system, and that the first place is in the school finance system.
Senator Campbell, quickly, the other reason that local property taxes go up is that the uncompensated care costs borne by hospitals that treat people who don't have access to insurance or access to care, those get passed along to all of us in the form of property tax as well. Couldn't it fairly be said, if you want to fix property taxes, you ought to fix health care first in the state of Texas so that more people don't have to show up at the doors of hospital emergency rooms? You're an emergency room doctor. You know this better than almost anybody in the legislature, that people who don't have insurance, if they have some basic medical need, they show up at the hospital and they ask to be treated, you don't turn them away, and then the cost of care of that person are passed along to everybody in the form of property taxes. Isn't that one of the reasons that we're seeing an increase in our property taxes as well?
It is the increase. Yes, that's part of the increase in taxes in general. There needs to be some accountability and for people getting their insurance. A lot of folks, not a lot, but I mean, there are a cohort that chooses not to have.
Yeah.
That chooses not to have insurance, and they show up in the ER, or our Medicaid bill is going up because we've got a lot of growth in Texas for Medicaid.
Yep.
And so, yes, I mean, we have to find a way to fund that.
Is that going to be a priority, Senator, in the next session? We've got the health care percentage of the all funds budget has now risen to equal or possibly even exceed the education portion of the all funds budget. We're in a situation now where health care costs, if we leave them unchecked in the state budget, are going to become the beast that ate Cleveland here pretty soon, right? I mean, they're going to overwhelm every other thing in the budget.
It is growing.
Yeah.
But trying to look at what do you cut when it comes into health care.
Right.
I mean, it's very difficult, you know,
right.
But we have to look at everything. I agree, we need to look at school finance. That's an antiquated system. Right. The way it's done. We've got to look at that.
A couple times you've said, Senator, and I hear you and I agree with you, you know, in order to put money into whether it's school finance or fixing health care or whatever else, we have to find other things in the budget that we can cut. Often when I talk to Democrats, principally Democrats, about the state budget, and I say, if you want to put more money into public education, tell me where that money is going to come from. They say, well, we've appropriated $800 million in 2 consecutive budgets for border security, which we heard during the Obama administration was a federal problem. Shouldn't we be handing off the cost of securing the border to the federal government? Is there an opportunity potentially to relitigate that conversation in the next session, Senator?
And that would be great. I mean, we have put money down there, good. The federal government is sending reinforcements down there, and hopefully they will take up more of that bill and that we don't have to put that much money in there. But securing our border is important. Yeah. But hopefully, you know, we've put money in it, and with reinforcements, we won't have to put as much in there. I think hopefully we don't have to do that. Yeah. And we need to look to the Texas delegation, the U.S. Texas delegation, to have them pay us back.
Right. I mean, my memory is that you all sent a bill to Washington for the cost incurred at one point. Have they ever written you a check for that money?
I'm thinking that didn't go very far.
Didn't go very far.
Right.
You talk about metrics on spending on public education, that in order to put more money in, you would want metrics back for the success of those dollars spent. Do you feel like we've gotten metrics on the border security stuff?
Not enough.
Not enough?
You know.
Yeah. That may be an area where you and Senator Watson agree. You think you've gotten enough metrics back for the spend on border security?
I don't at all.
Every microphone breaks when you touch it. What's wrong with you?
Yeah, I don't know. The answer to the questions about
Yeah.
metrics on
Yeah.
border security,
Yes, sir.
and on the Sunset Commission, we actually looked at this pretty closely, and there's been a very recent Austin American Statesman story done that shows that some of the metrics that's being used by DPS include DWIs in the Hill Country, and counting that as part of the border security. Border security is one of those things that I don't know why it's become one of those partisan issues where you can't have the open, honest discussion about it. We ought to have metrics in the schools. We ought to have metrics in health. Any area we're spending the money, it's one of the reasons.
It's accountability.
It's accountability. It's one of the reasons I'm so much in favor of certain open government activity, is so that we can have that accountability. But for some reason, when it comes to border security, some act like it's a matter of faith. They're just going to do right with that money, and we got caught coming and going. Sometimes you say, look at these big numbers of crimes that are being committed. Are we getting a bang for our buck? And the response is, that's why we need the bucks. And then the next time you come back and say, look, there's only a small amount of crime here. Should we be spending this kind of money with that small amount of crime? Well, you see, it's working. So you get caught coming and going on it, and we don't have sufficient metrics.
Senator Campbell, before we go to the audience, what is an issue that we should be focused on in the next session that maybe is not on everybody's radar screen? If I ask any legislator, they say public education, border security, transportation. The things that are obvious are obvious. What's not obvious? What's on your mind heading into the next session as a priority, or ought to be a priority for the 86th?
Well, I think while we haven't talked about it today, it's still probably on a lot of people's mind. That's school safety. I know we're going to be talking about that. I think we're all in agreement.
Yeah.
We want to do something about that. The common things, like you said, just a fiscally conservative budget. How are we going to fund everything?
This is the first budget after Harvey, right?
Yes.
So we have to see what the impact of Harvey recovery spend is on your ability to give money to the things you normally give money to.
And Harvey hit, I think, many areas.
22% of the state.
Education.
Yeah.
It just really it had a big effect on us. So we're going to be having to pay for that.
Yeah.
And personally, things that I think minimize regulations. We want to keep a good business climate. Specifically for me, something that is important. When our military gets transferred to Texas, we got a lot of military in Texas.
Right.
When they get transferred to Texas, their wife or husband may have an occupational license in another state, but they come here, they don't have their occupational license, so they can't work.
Right.
Hits the income of the family, and some of them make decisions they have to stay in the other state until they can get a license here. So for me, it's important just for our military to make sure that we get a reciprocity, if you will, to allow those that have an occupational license to go ahead and still work here until they can get their Texas license.
Right.
So that's an important thing.
That's what government. It's interesting that we talk about all these big picture things, but honestly, something like that probably affects an extraordinary number of lives. You for reciprocity for that?
Yes.
You are?
Yeah.
Area of agreement. Good.
Yeah,
I like that.
We sit right beside each other, and
Not just now.
right.
You
And
were pointing out the obvious.
and today he's to the left of me as usual, but in the Senate, he sits to the right of me. And we get along. We get along great.
Good.
So we have a lot of areas of
Good.
bipartisan agreement.
Same question for you, Senator.
Sure.
What is the thing not on everybody's mind, or that we haven't talked about today, that you would identify as something we ought to be talking about heading into the session?
Mental health and brain health, and we've made real progress over a couple of sessions.
You put more money
that's
in
right.
mental health.
And in fact, here locally, since we're in Austin, talking about Austin, one of the areas that we did right last session is we put planning money into the budget for the Austin State Hospital. I could give you the long background on it, but we're making real progress working with the Dell Medical School at UT and the Department of Psychiatry there, and a large steering committee on what has been called the Austin State Hospital Brain Health System Redesign. So as we come into this legislative session, we're going to be in a position to do even more in that regard. I would say so that's if you ask me one, that's the one I would jump on. I would say this so that folks know that Comptroller Hager just recently came out with a new estimate and of money that we'll have available, and we get a little bit of breathing room in that. And we'll have some breathing room that will help us in a supplemental budget be able to pay for some of the deferrals, like our Medicaid deferrals that we did from last session. You know, you end up having two budgets basically in every session. One is a supplemental budget that supplements the one we're in, and then the budget for the next biennium. And then with regard to the Hurricane Harvey and school safety, I think you're going to have money available in the rainy day fund is going to have lots of money.
It's going to be back to 11.9 billion, as I understand it, because of oil and gas severance taxes.
Right at $12 billion.
Yeah, right.
And I think that creates a real opportunity for us to, depending upon what the legislature decides to do in terms of dealing with school property values that went down as a result of Hurricane Harvey, I think you're going to be in a position to use some of that for both Hurricane Harvey and for school safety, and I hope for mental health facilities.
Good. All right, so we'll go to audience questions. We have microphones in the room that will walk around to find your hand. We'll take as many questions as time allow. Please ask a question, don't make a speech, and for God's sakes, please be nice or nice-ish, okay? Nice-ish, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Connie Gray. Senator Campbell, I requested appointments with you in 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, and you refused to meet with me because I was not your constituent. I am proud to say that I do now live in your district, and I'm publicly asking if you will keep an appointment with me personally, not your aides, during this session. Thank you.
Sure. Well, and I can tell you we see people frequently from out of the district. What is your name?
Connie Gray.
Yeah, we've met with, haven't we met with Connie Gray? No. Yes, we have. John, my staff is right here. But either way, well, we most certainly will.
Great.
Next question.
Generally speaking, this has been a big topic in the last election cycle of whether elected officials are responsive enough to constituents, holding town halls and all that. You both say that heading into this next cycle, you'll see people, you'll meet with your constituents, all that kind of stuff.
But we do. I mean, I know Senator Watson does. I do. And there is a balance. There's a balance to life and work and mother and Senate and campaign. But yes, we meet. I mean, you've asked me publicly. I most certainly will do that. But I want everybody to know there is still life outside the Senate. And and that's why we have a staff. And we have a competent staff, or we'd change them out. But, you know.
I like your staff.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Seems competent to me. So, okay. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, good afternoon, Senator Campbell, Senator Watson. My name is Olivia Huerta, and I'm a student. I'm at this university.
Yes.
I major in behavioral neuroscience. I just had a question. So I heard you guys saying, or you, Senator Campbell, saying that you want to see performance as to whether you, before issuing a blanketed statement about funding public or deferring funds for more public education. So I'm curious as to what kind of performance you're kind of looking for, because I was one of those students when I was growing up that I wasn't expected to go to college. I wasn't expected to perform well in life, and I felt like I was very much left behind. And as I speak to more people, though this may seem anecdotal, that's appearing more like the case. So I joined the military. I have a second question. You are on the Committee on Veterans Affairs. And as a 5-year veteran of the Navy, I very much got a lot of benefit out of the Veterans Choice Program. I'm being told now, though, that I cannot have the ability to go out and get the care that I need out in the community, simply because there's a lot of cutting back on funding.
Okay.
So this is a huge problem for me in regards to mental health, because I've had 3 different psychologists come in and out of the VA. We have a big problem with doctors kind of coming in and out.
Okay. So let's take those 2. We take them one at a time. Is that all right?
Yes.
So on the question of public education performance, you've asked you've said basically, I'd like to see metrics for performance before I'm willing to consider supporting
Right,
more
and
funding.
I-
Can you be specific for the question, to the questioner's
I think
point?
the TEA is looking at performance measures, how to, I'm not the guru on best metrics, but we need to see how we are closing the gap on a child that comes in at one level, making sure there is growth. Every child's not going to grow at the same level.
Right.
But we need to see that. How that's done, I'm leaving it up to the experts. So that's what I'm talking about in performance measures. And regarding the choice,
Veterans Choice.
Veterans Choice Act, that is a federal program. They're trying to expand it. I went to D.C., sat with Senator Cornyn, and we talked about that. So we are working on that to expand it. We've got the strike force that we pay for in Texas to help veterans matriculate through the system so they can get benefits. So happy to take your address and we can talk to whoever the Veterans Service Officer is in your district or at your address and see how we can get you hooked up with the strike force officer.
Okay.
Thank you.
You want to,
Yeah, I want to, on the first part of her question, I'd like to just say there are a couple of things that all of you ought to look at as you advocate for positions, if you want to advocate for a position with regard to public education. One is the Higher Education Coordinating Board has put together what has been almost, well, it's universally agreed, it is our target in Texas. It's called 60 by 30 TX. And it's about how many folks the percentage of people that we're going to have with post-secondary degrees or certificates, which requires post-secondary. And so it plays a very important role in the way we're all looking at it. So when we talk about metrics, we know the metric that is one of our ultimate
and that's
goals.
60% of Texans between the ages of 25 and 34.
35.
Or
Right.
5, but with some kind of post-secondary completion by
2030.
2030.
And
60 by 30.
And if you look at that, what you will see is they break it down in a variety of demographics and in a variety of different ways that create clear targets as a potential metric. The other thing that I'd point out, if you're interested in this, is look at what the Public Education Commission that was created last session, what its outcomes report talks about. One of the metrics there that I think is really important is third grade passage on the tests. And right now, we have under 50% of those children are qualifying as meets the standard. That's a pretty striking metric. And what they're advocating for is greater pre-K, greater early childhood development. So when we start talking about metrics, there are some out there that we know we're not meeting, and we could.
Excellent. Sir.
Jim Brennan, I'm Texas Legislative Director for the Texas Coalition of Veterans Organizations. We've talked about the lack of new revenue sources. Are we going to see any consideration given, based on the Supreme Court decision to allow sports betting, that might be able to fill some of the gap coming up? Also, we've got a $53 a barrel of oil this morning. That's going to impact us too. So,
Yeah.
are we going to look at some new revenue sources?
Oil and gas is on the upswing, and so there seems to be some opportunity there for more revenue to naturally come into the state budget. But Senator Campbell, Senator Watson, gambling has come back up as a topic. What do you say?
I anticipate. Man, it really does. Okay. I'm starting to take it personally.
I bet the microphone doesn't work. How about that? There's some gambling. Right, safe bet.
I think that you will you'll hear more discussion, but I don't think that you will. My bet is that you won't see sports gambling be something that ends up passing in some way that you see revenue.
Are you personally for it, Senator?
You know, I would probably vote to do something with it. Yeah. We'd have to do, I hate to give a mealy-mouthed answer, but I'd have to see what the bill actually does and how it goes about it. But
you're open to it, though.
I'm very open to it, and particularly in a state where it continues to say, "Well, we can't do that with revenue," or "We can't do that with revenue." It really does create a potential, and so I would be for that. With regard to the oil and gas part of your question, I really do think it's time for us to look at how we use that revenue and use that resource in this very rich state more than we currently do.
Senator, are you okay with gambling as a topic of
No,
conversation?
I think it's a poor way
That's
to
why I
raise.
answered your question the way I did.
I think that raising revenue on something like that is just not a good way to raise revenue. No.
You think your problem is with the mechanism or with the morality of gambling being legal?
I just don't.
and
I don't
therefore-
think it's a healthy. It's not a. I'm not for it. I don't like it. I don't think it's a healthy activity, especially to support financing the state of Texas and
I
our
support
issues.
personal choice and responsibility.
I'm so glad.
I think he's throwing a little liberty shade your way, Senator.
He is.
Isn't he doing that? Okay.
He is.
We have time for one more.
And
Okay.
I'm glad for that.
We have a question over here. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, yes, my name is Marcy Purcell. I'm with Texas Adoptee Rights. Each session, we put forward a bill that has bipartisan support. Thank you, Senator Watson, for your continued support the last few sessions. My question is, with the American Academy of Adoption Attorneys' recent full-throated endorsement of original birth certificate access for adult adoptees, saying, and I quote, "The societal norms which previously supported closed records laws have evolved and are no longer consistent with prioritizing the confidentiality of adoption records over the express needs of adopted persons to access their adoption records." The question is, Senator Campbell, how can you still oppose this bill when many of the oldest, most conservative agencies and individuals are recognizing that just because someone is adopted doesn't mean they can be treated differently under the law?
Do you oppose this legislation?
I do.
Can you explain why?
Because I still support closed adoption if that's what the birth parents want. Many birth mothers and parents are choosing open adoption, and that's great. But for the small group that still want closed adoption, we don't want to stop anything that would prohibit adoption, the opportunity for adoption. And I will add, which she didn't say, we already have a volunteer way to match up adoptees with their biological parents at age 18. We've got that at the Vital Statistics Unit here in Texas. So there is a way. If the parent chooses later to want to be known and matched, it's a voluntary thing. So we've got that. I am against getting rid of closed adoption.
You're where you've been on that issue, but
I haven't changed. And I have 4 adopted daughters, married into 3, and I have 1. So
your support of this legislation characterized
Yeah,
properly?
I've co-authored it and will continue to support it.
Okay. Jesse, we're done? We have no more time. I'm very sorry that we're out of time. We appreciate you all coming, and we especially appreciate Senators Campbell and Watson for giving us time today. Please give them a big hand.
Thank you all.
Thank you to St. Edwards. We'll see you again. Happy holidays. Thank you, ma'am.